Hey you guys, welcome back to the salon. So I guess it was about time to get back to doing this series again. I can't remember when the last one was. I don't think it was that long ago actually. But yeah, if you're new here, this is my series where I talk about my 5 favorite horror films from every year since the year I was born, which was 1972. Now, today's video is going to be about 1981. Now, 1981, another banner year for horror, and so the hard thing wasn't picking out 5 movies that I really liked, but kind of winnowing out like the ones from all the ones that I picked because there were so many good ones. I initially picked out 15 movies, so it was really hard, like trying to figure out which ones were like the top 5. So, if you do the math on that, you will figure out that there are 10, count them, 10 honorable mentions this time around, which I think might be the most so far. I can't actually remember. I mean, I know that I started doing more and more honorable mentions like as the videos went on, just because so many good movies came out in the successive years like of the 70s. But yeah, I've got 10 honorable mentions this time. And here they are in alphabetical order. Dead and Buried. I feel like this is a tragically underrated and a really original take on a zombie film. I hesitate to even call it a zombie film because it's not what you're thinking. It's just got its really own unique thing going on, and I really have never seen it done in like this particular way. And I do kind of feel like maybe nowadays it's kind of getting some of the attention that it deserves, but it definitely needs more because I really, really love this movie. This movie also happens to have been written by Dan O'Bannon and Ronald Shusett, which every horror fan will know, were also the guys who wrote Alien. So there you go. Friday the 13th Part 2. In my opinion, this is actually the best of the series. There are a couple other ones in there that I really liked as well, but this is just my favorite one. It's always the one that I go back to, like for comfort food or whatever. And, again, horror movie fans will probably know that this is the first where Jason Voorhees was the actual killer, although he doesn't have the hockey mask in this one. He just has like a burlap sack over his head, like the Phantom Killer of Texarkana. You know what I mean? Also, I think my favorite thing about this movie is Amy Steele. She is like kick-ass, and she is a great final girl, and I think that really like elevates this one out of all the other ones in the series. Next honorable mention would be The Funhouse, which is Tobe Hooper's slasher, which is kind of set in a carnival setting, and it's like really good and really creepy. It's basically, it's a pretty simple setup where like, these teenagers go to this funhouse and they get trapped in there, and then all kind of shenanigans ensue. But again, very, very good in Tobe Hooper's career, and I feel like it doesn't get enough love, but it's really, really good. Ghost Story. Now, this is a substantially simplified, but still pretty solid adaptation of the novel by Peter Straub, which is great, this big, great, sprawling novel. This is actually sort of about a group of old men who are plagued by this kind of like shape-shifting succubus, I guess she would be called, who like poses as different women like over the years, you know what I mean? Like I said, the book is excellent, and the movie, it kind of had to, because the book is so huge and everything and sprawling, it really kind of had to simplify things down to just this one core story, and I think they did a really good job with it. But I mean, I'm gonna say like if you are really into it, like you should read the book because it's way better. But the movie is actually like a really solid adaptation, and I saw it a lot when I was growing up, and so I have a lot of fondness for it. So The House by the Cemetery. This is of course Lucio Fulci's vaguely Lovecraftian film, I want to say. I don't want to go too far in that direction, but it does have that kind of, because he was kind of into putting like little Lovecraftian touches in his stuff. This was also, at least according to the screenwriter, Dardano Sacchetti, I believe, was the screenwriter on this, that it was very, very loosely inspired by The Turn of the Screw, the Henry James novella, very, very famously, which has been adapted lots and lots of times. So this was actually, of course, the third in Lucio Fulci's unconnected Gates of Hell trilogy. Like I said, they're not, it's not like sequels or anything like that, but they're all kind of like thematically very similar. Now I'm going to say like probably the most famous thing about this movie is like the dubbing on Bob, the kid that plays Bob, which is a little grating, I'm going to say, but it's also still kind of like endearing, even though it's like pretty atrocious. And I really, really do like the look of the sort of antagonist, which is like Dr. Freudstein, who is kind of like this gooey doctor that like, using corpses like to bring himself back to life. So yeah, I was really into this. It was not my, I don't think it's my favorite one of the Gates of Hell trilogy. We'll talk about that other one in a minute, but I actually really do like this film still. Ms. 45 is probably my favorite rape revenge movie ever. This was, of course, directed by Abel Ferrara, and this follows a mute woman who gets raped twice in one day in New York City, and then essentially goes on a man-killing spree, some of which is like dressed like a nun. So I'm just like, what's not to love about that? But yeah, this is a pretty awesome movie. And again, it's one that I don't hear a lot of people like talking about, and they absolutely should, because I'm really into this movie. So of course, My Bloody Valentine, have to mention that one. This is actually one of the first slashers I saw when I was a little kid. You know, and this is a fun Canadian film. And unlike a lot of other slasher films, or even just a lot of other horror films in general, it's kind of set in like a working class sort of framework, like a mining town, which you don't really see too much in a lot of films. So I thought that was a nice touch, and has some pretty savage kills, some of which were cut out at the time, but you know, have subsequently been put back in there. And it really does have a commitment to its holiday theming. Like, this whole town is like called Valentine Falls or Valentine something, and it's just like, so they're just like really into Valentine's Day. That's like their thing. So I really like that because of like all the red and like people's hearts being cut out and stuff like that. And like I said, this movie scared the absolute shit out of me the first time I saw it. Like the guy with the pickaxe and everything, like that's not that scary in retrospect, but you know, if you're a little kid, yeah, it's gonna be like pretty terrifying. So Possession, I don't want to say too much about this one because I talked extensively about this over on my other channel, but this is a classic of art house horror. It's not real straightforward. It's kind of like psychological horror, but it definitely does have some monstery body horror kind of stuff going on at the end, which, you know, if you've seen it, you know what I'm talking about, but it's definitely like a what the fuck kind of movie for sure. But I mean, the acting performances in this one by Isabella Adjani and Sam Neill are just out of this world. They're completely amazing, and I think they really like elevate this film as well. This is a weird one for sure. If you're not into art house horror, you're not going to dig it, I don't think, but I really dug it. Of course, I also had to mention Scanners, David Cronenberg's film about kind of like a low-key battle between factions of telekinetic people, I guess. And this movie, even though it's not my favorite of his, again, it has a lot more to offer than, I feel like most people nowadays just identify it with that one admittedly awesome like scene where that dude's head just explodes. Like I said, it's like a meme now and everything like that, but it does have a lot more to offer like besides that. Like it's kind of slow in places, I'm not gonna lie, but I really do like the concept of it. So Wolfen, this was another movie that I saw a lot like when I was growing up, and I probably should watch it again, like revisit it, because I probably haven't seen it in many years, but I remember like really digging this movie. And it's actually kind of a different sort of werewolf film. It's actually structured more like a crime thriller, and it's based on a novel by Whitley Strieber. Yes, that Whitley Strieber that said that he got kidnapped by aliens and he got anal probed, and wrote the book Communion about it, which was turned into a hilarious slash awful movie with Christopher Walken. Seriously, it has to be seen to be believed, especially the anal probing scene, which still makes me laugh just like fucking thinking about it. If you've seen it, you know what I mean. But it's just like one of the funniest things I've ever seen. Whitley Strieber also wrote the book that The Hunger was based on, which is probably one of my favorite vampire movies of all time, and another one that doesn't really get talked about a lot. But yeah, so Wolfen was based on, I think the book was called The Wolfen, but you know what I mean, it was the same kind of thing. And I actually don't think I ever read the book, so I don't know how you know, accurate the adaptation is, but I remember the movie being really good. Like I said, I kind of need to revisit it, but I just remember digging it. I remember digging it enough that I was pretty comfortable like putting it as an honorable mention, you know what I mean? Okay, so now for the top 5 after all of that. You know what I mean? All right, so top 5 in alphabetical order. Yes, we've got more werewolves, and we're actually not done talking about them yet, you know, strangely enough. There'll be more werewolf stuff, like, further on down the line. But this movie is kind of more like a traditional werewolf film, I guess. Of course, this was directed by John Landis, and it's considered a horror comedy, even though it's got, like, some scary shit in it, too, but it's mostly kind of, like, funny or, like, blackly humorous, I guess. And I'm gonna say, at least in my opinion, and maybe this is just coming from me because I'm old, But this movie just never seems to age to me at all. And I think most of that is down to just like the fucking amazing special effects by Rick Baker. I mean, the werewolf transformation in this movie looks, at least in my opinion, just as incredible as it did back in 1981. And honestly, I don't think that a transformation scene like this has ever been topped. Like, especially the way they shot it just in bright white light, where the dude is just transforming like in the middle of a living room or something like that, and it just looks incredible. So in case you don't know, American Werewolf in London tells the story of two American friends whose names are David and Jack. They're actually played by David Naughton and Griffin Dunn, respectively. And they get attacked by a large animal on the Yorkshire moors during a backpacking trip that they're doing through England. Now, Jack is killed outright by this animal, but David actually survives the attack, and he, so he gets to go to the hospital and everything like that, and he actually ends up developing a romance with his beautiful nurse, whose name is Alex, and she's actually played by Jenny Agutter, who was also in Logan's Run, by the way. Well, she was in lots of stuff, but I remember her mainly from Logan's Run. So while David is recovering in the hospital, he starts getting very unsettling visits from his dead friend Jack, who looks more decomposed like every subsequent time he shows up. So Jack basically is warning David. It's like, look, the creature that attacked me was a werewolf, and he got you too, and so that means that you are also a werewolf, so you need to kill yourself before the next full moon, or you're gonna transform into a wolf and you're gonna start slaughtering innocent people, which you probably don't want to do. Now, of course, David doesn't really believe this because, why would you? He just thinks it's some side effect of the medication or whatever. So I'm gonna say, like I said, even though this movie is however many decades old it is now, this is still an outstanding horror movie. It's gruesome, it's darkly funny, and I'm even gonna say, like, the kind of really sweet burgeoning love story between David and Alex, the characters, it kind of means that the story gets tinged a little bit with tragedy as well. Like, you really kind of do feel for the characters, which is kind of amazing. So it kind of has something for everybody. And like I said, the transformation scene is like a total showstopper, but there are actually like a bunch of other really iconic like bits in this movie that are just every bit as noteworthy as that. My favorite of those being like David's scary dream sequences, like with the Nazi werewolves and all that other stuff. That is super cool. But yeah, I mean, overall, this is, and I don't think anyone's going to argue with, well, maybe somebody will argue, I don't know, but I doubt it. I kind of feel like this is easily one of the best werewolf films ever made, and also one of the best horror comedies ever made. So there's that. So, we're back to Lucio Fulci again. We talked about House by the Cemetery up in the honorable mentions, but now we're going to talk about the granddaddy of them all, The Beyond. Now, I don't think, again, that most people would argue with me, but I'm sure somebody will out there somewhere, that The Beyond is probably Fulci's magnum opus, I want to say. It's the most beautifully grotesque of all his movies, also the most unapologetically surreal. I think it's got like a lot of the most iconic imagery that people remember a lot, like other than the eye gouging from Zombie. I think everybody remembers that, but I think this has most of the most imagery that people remember from his movies, and I think that it's all the stronger for its surrealism. You know what I mean? It's also got a lot of elements of Southern Gothic, which I was really into. So I'm going to say, even though, like a lot of Fulci's fun, like a lot of Italian horror films in general, the plot of the movie isn't really kind of the point of the exercise or the star of the show or anything like that. It does sort of have one, though. So apparently, back in the 1920s, there was this artist who practiced black magic, and he happens to know the whereabouts of one of the 7 gates of hell, which coincidentally happens to be located right underneath the Seven Doors Hotel in New Orleans, Louisiana, which is where he lives. Now, the artist, back in the 1920s, later gets killed by a lynch mob because of the whole practicing black magic thing, which, people were just not about it. So many years afterward, like in the quote-unquote modern day, a woman from New York City whose name is Liza, who's played by Catriona MacColl, who, of course, is in all of the Gates of Hell movies, she actually inherits the place, and she's going to fix it up and reopen it, like as a hotel or bed and breakfast or whatever. But one day, while she's out driving, there's this very creepy, white-eyed blind girl with a dog, like just standing in the middle of this empty causeway, And she, you know, she's like driving her car. There's nobody else around, and she like stops. So she meets this girl, and this girl's name is Emily. And Emily is basically telling her, hey, you may not want to reopen that hotel because, you know, it's kind of the gate to hell and everything. And it would appear that her warnings do have some merit in that regard. Because not long after this, all kind of bizarre shit starts happening. For example, a couple of people that are working on the hotel die. One of them falls off a ladder after seeing like an apparition or something like in a window. One of them gets attacked by sort of a shambling corpse kind of situation in the waterlogged basement. Also, the architect who's doing the hotel renovations or who planned them or whatever, he also falls off a ladder, but in a library, like somewhere else, and gets killed by a bunch of tarantulas because reasons. Also, Emily herself, who may or may not really exist, like don't ask, she actually ends up having her throat torn out by her own guide dog, whose name is Dickie. So the upshot of all of this is that just as this Book of Ibon, I guess is how you pronounce it, which is also kind of a Lovecraftian touch there, but they show this book throughout the movie. It's kind of like a big, linchpin of the plot or whatever. So just as that book predicted, one of the gates of hell has opened underneath the hotel, and this event is presumably going to lead to the end of the world at some point. I mean, the final sequence of The Beyond, while it is somewhat like, what the fuck, it's also pretty terrific, I have to say. Like, Liza and her helpful sidekick friend or whatever, whose name is Dr. John McCabe, who's played by David Warbeck, who is also in a lot of Fulci movies, they kind of end up wandering into this vast wasteland that looks like the one that was painted by the occult artist, like back in the 1920s. And the implication being, I guess, that like the earth is now hell. Like hell has opened up and now everything is all fucked on Earth, and now the two places are the same. But yeah, I really do like the end of this movie, and it's just really bleak. And I mean, how many other horror movies end like that? Really, not very many. So this is another movie that, I mean, it's a pretty obvious pick. Evil Dead. Now, Sam Raimi, it's a classic, obviously. Cost, I don't even remember how much this cost. It was like just a micro-budget movie, and it does kind of show, but that's okay. And I'm going to say that even to this day, I think this movie is sort of like a masterclass in what a group of like really, really talented friends can come up with, like just with no money, but just using their own creativity and their enthusiasm, like for the horror genre. I mean, this is just like a fun, gory movie. Now, the original Evil Dead obviously was so successful that as of this recording, it has spawned 2 direct sequels, a soft reboot in 2013, a sequel to that in 2023, which just came out, which I still haven't seen yet, but I'm gonna get around to it soon. And I'm going to say, too, the absolutely delightful TV series, Ash vs. Evil Dead, which actually ran for 3 seasons, and which, if you haven't seen it, please, please watch it, because it is so, so great. There is one sequence in there, it's either in Season 1 or Season 2, and I almost don't even want to spoil it, but it involves Bruce Campbell and his face, or his head, and a corpse's butthole. And you really, really have to see it to believe it. I swear it's one of the funniest fucking things I've ever seen. But it was just, and also one of the most grotesque and wrong. But it's like, that made it like even more awesome to me. But seriously, if you haven't seen Ash vs. Evil Dead, please see it. It's wonderful. Also, I'm going to have to say, like, speaking of Bruce Campbell, that Evil Dead introduced the world to Bruce Campbell, and he is just a national fucking treasure. I mean, and also if you haven't read his books, like If Chins Could Kill, and he's written a couple other ones that I have, please read those, because he's just a hilarious, like, delightful human being. So, obviously the story of the Evil Dead is extremely, extremely simple. It's basically just a cabin in the woods kind of story. Just like a gang of young people, they're on vacation at this remote cabin, like out in Tennessee somewhere, and they start kind of inadvertently, sort of vertently, fooling around with occult forces they don't understand, and end up getting possessed by demons. But I'm going to say that the execution here is what's really makes this movie for me. It's just brims with this kind of like crazy energy. Like I said, you could tell they were really into like making this movie, and they're really enthusiastic about it, and it's just so gleeful. It just like throws everything in the wall, like, to see what sticks. There's just zany camera angles. There's just like fountains of gore. You know, there's some kind of like rudimentary but still like pretty awesome stop motion animation. I love the stop motion in this. It's just, it looks cheap, but it's like, it looks really cool though, you know what I mean? And also have one incident of tree rape, so there's that as well. And I'm going to say that Bruce Campbell, I mean, he was really game. They just, Sam Raimi, which did all kind of horrible shit to that poor man, like, during this fucking series. And he was just there for it. And he was just, like, a really good sport. So I think that was, like, that's really great. And just, like, his facial expressions, the way he mugs and stuff like that. I just fucking love Bruce Campbell. Oh, and also see Bubba Hotep, if you haven't seen that. So, like I said, I mean, The Evil Dead is very cheap. It's very homemade, and it shows. But I think that that's kind of part of its enduring charm. It's almost like a punk rock kind of vibe to it. And I think it's like the movie's just this unfettered exuberance that it has, and it just and I think that ends up making it like almost irresistible. Like I said, it's just so fun. Now, some would argue that the second film, which was nominally a sequel, but was really kind of more of a higher budget remake of the first one, a lot of people would argue that that's better. And on some days, I might actually maybe even be inclined to agree with them. But I mean, it's kind of really hard to fault the just really entertaining DIY vibe of the original, like the one that started it all, you know? So this movie might be something of an offbeat choice. And it's not one that gets brought up a lot. But this movie actually made a really big impression on me the first time I saw it as a kid. Probably because it has to do with, you know, limb removal. Because I always had like a thing, like I was really freaked out by like decapitation or like limbs getting cut off and stuff like that. And this has that. So I think it made a big impression for that. But I've watched it several subsequent times, you know, since then. And every time I watch it, like, it just kind of rises in my estimation. So this was actually only the second film directed by the legendary Oliver Stone. Now, this movie, The Hand, is a psychological horror, and it's based on a novel by Mark Brandel, which is called The Lizard's Tale, which, if you've seen the movie, you'll probably know why it's called that. So Michael Caine, who is fucking terrifying in this, he plays a famous like comic book illustrator named John Lansdale. And he actually got quite wealthy drawing this really popular sort of Conan-like character, which is called Mandro. However, just lately, Mandro isn't selling as well as before, you know, kind of due to changing times and whatever. That's kind of a big theme of this movie. And John's publisher is thinking about bringing in like a new artist to sort of like revamp the property more in line with modern times or whatever. And as if all that wasn't enough, John's wife, Anne, is also implying that she wants a separation. Now, she is implying that she feels stifled by John's very controlling personality. And she's kind of been exploring more of like a new agey kind of lifestyle with her very hunky yoga instructor, which of course John, who is like super macho, he just doesn't have any time for that airy-fairy bullshit, so he's like getting all upset about that. But it turns out that Anne has actually been also humping her yoga instructor as well, so I'm not even sure what that yoga position is called, but I'm sure they have a name for it. Now, not long into the story, John and Anne are in the car, and they're involved in this kind of freak car accident, and Anne is driving, so there's like a lot of resentment built up there. But it turns out that John's drawing hand is completely severed in the accident. And obviously they do make attempts to find the hand, but you know, the wily little guy is just nowhere to be found, so they can't like sew it back on, you know what I mean? So John ends up getting fitted with like a metal hook hand, but just this whole, like, he's so bitter at not being able to draw anymore because that was his livelihood, and it's this sort of like compounds with all the other upheavals that are going on in his life, and it pretty much causes him to go off the deep end and start believing, rightly or wrongly, that his severed hand is just crawling around out there on its own and killing people that John hates. So the movie kind of leaves it relatively ambiguous as to whether the hand really is murdering people or whether John is doing it and like dissociating from his actions by kind of attributing it to this severed hand like crawling around on his own. The final scene, though, would seem to suggest that the hand is actually killing people, but it also leaves kind of enough plausible deniability that you could still say that it was all in his head, you know what I mean? So I thought that was kind of one of the movie's strengths, that they never do come out and tell you. I mean, so whatever the case is, I feel like the hand is like really very sadly underseen, even though it's Oliver Stone. So you'd think that like a lot of people would be into that, but it's just a really good descent into madness kind of tale, which also kind of examines maybe the repercussions when a man who is just the very definition, he's like, you look up toxic masculinity in the dictionary and this character is like right there. It's just, he ticks all the boxes, you know what I mean? But they're kind of exploring the fact that when a man like this, when he can't cope with his changing circumstances, with the changing times, shit isn't going the way he wants, how that ends up acting like making him act out in like the most destructive way possible, whether it's the hand doing it or whether it's him doing it. So yeah, I told you we were going to be talking about werewolves again. There's a lot of werewolves on this video now that I'm thinking about it. But here we are with another one of the best entries into the werewolf subgenre. Now this was actually loosely based on a novel by Gary Brandner, and this one was directed by yet another horror legend, Joe Dante. Now, The Howling, much like American Werewolf in London, this one also has humor mixed in with it, so it almost, or I don't know if I'd go so far as to call it a black comedy, but it definitely has like a satirical edge to it. Like the humor in both of these is similar, but there is a lot of difference. I feel like The Howling is more satirical, you know, where American Werewolf in London is kind of more black comedy, but not so much satire. If that, I know that's like a fine distinction, but you know, if you've seen them, you probably know what I'm talking about. Now, the effects in this movie are also spectacular. Matter of fact, Rick Baker, who, you know, I just mentioned worked on American Werewolf in London, was initially supposed to work on this movie, but left to go work on American Werewolf. So what they ended up doing was they got another genre guy, Rob Bottin, who would, of course, go on to do fucking amazing work in John Carpenter's The Thing, also in RoboCop. He did like a shit ton of other movies, but yeah, and his work in this is also just chef's kiss, you know what I mean? So the story of The Howling revolves around this TV newswoman named Karen White, who's played by Dee Wallace, and she's at the beginning being stalked by a serial killer, and she kind of eventually agrees to like act as bait in a sting operation, like for the police to catch the murderer. Now, after this whole harrowing experience, because she does almost get killed and it's this whole thing, her therapist ends up sending her and her husband to this sort of secluded resort called The Colony in order to recover from the trauma. Little do they know. Well, they do know, you know what I mean? So since this movie is called The Howling, it should come as no surprise to anyone that the colony is basically a front for a pack of werewolves, one of which is the serial killer that Karen believed that she had escaped from. Now again, the effects work here is really like a standout. These werewolves are actually kind of more of the big two-legged variety. I believe these werewolves were kind of like the inspirations for the ones in Dog Soldiers, which came out in 2002, I believe, which that if you like werewolf movies, please see Dog Soldiers. If you haven't, it's British and it's really, really good. But yeah, I think this Dog Soldiers, I think that's where they got the idea for the look of the werewolf, because that's kind of what these ones look like. They're like the big two-legged ones that are really tall. Whereas the one from American Werewolf in London looks more like a traditional wolf, just like a real big one. Like it's not like Superman looking or anything like that. Now, when this movie came out, critical response to it was pretty mixed, although the movie was like a pretty modest like financial success, I guess, and it's now considered, I suppose, like a minor classic, if not a classic. So much so that I don't know if you knew this, I didn't actually really know this. I knew there was a lot, but I didn't know that there were seven sequels to The Howling. I've seen the second one, which was awful. And I didn't really see the need to like see any more of them. So if you've seen any of the other ones and they're worth watching, let me know, because I'll watch them. There was also a comic book series based on the lore of this. A few years back, I remember they were talking about doing a remake of this, but I don't know if it ever actually went anywhere. A lot of stuff doesn't that they talk about. And honestly, you can't really go wrong with the original. It's just like a really fun werewolf movie. It has loads of gore, just really, really stellar visual effects. Some legitimately scary scenes in there, and it just has like a really cool, like a very sly, like sarcastic tone that really kind of like enhances the whole experience of the movie. So that's one more year down, lots and lots and lots left to go So please stay tuned for the next installment whenever I get around to it. Probably won't be. It's maybe another month or something like that. And, I hope you enjoyed this one. Please argue about your own favorite movies from 1981 in the comments. Please like, share, subscribe, comment, do all of that other kind of stuff. It really helps in the algorithm. And I'll see you guys again on the next one. Bye.
And now was acknowledged the presence of the Red Death. He had come like a thief in the night, and one by one dropped the revelers in the blood-bedewed holes of their road, and died each in the despairing posture of his fall. And the life of the ebony clock went out with that of the last of the gang, and the flames of the tripods expired.